Well, episode one is done and dusted, and I'd love to thank everyone for all their support. It's been great to see all the feedback and the suggestions as well too. Really appreciate that. So keep those coming forward. Here we are for episode two. And it's a short turnaround because we're going to be talking today about the science of marathon recovery. Now, just as a bit of an update on my personal update and, to kick things off, I just ran the half marathon on the weekend for Melbourne. I paced the half marathon. Second time pacing, I was pacing the 1:35 group in the half and had a great time. It was so much fun. As I said, the second time I did it last year, I did the marathon, and this year with Sydney, having run Sydney Marathon, I didn't quite want to put myself forward for the marathon, so opted for the half instead, and it was a great day out. We had beautiful conditions, so couldn't complain about that. And thankfully, with the help of my two other paces, we came through in under the 1:35 marks, which was great. Had a few people that were hung along with us right through to the end there. So it was a great day out. We obviously had a number of runners that were running there too, and so it was a really good day out amongst our crew. Actually, we had 15 PBs across the marathon, the half marathon, and the 10. We had some four first timers. There were some really good stories amongst that our crew. There were some people that were coming back from injury and that had missed last year and missed races early in the year. So it was really great to see. Caught up with a number of you at the race and was able to cheer you on or see you at the finish line and give you some hugs and high fives. So it was just a really, really good day. Certainly really filled my cup. And again, doing what I do in terms of our coaching and helping my runners get to that start line. Sometimes in the face of injury, it was really pleasing to see everyone hitting those goals. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to put this episode out today was off the back of Melbourne Marathon being run on the weekend and having a lot of runners that have done that. There was also Chicago Marathon that's been also on the same day, and then sort of not far off as well from Berlin, and then even from Sydney, which was 6-7 weeks ago now. So this podcast is going to be suitable for both for runners and also for health professionals that treat runners and even coaches themselves. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about why you should recover, what's going on inside your body. We're going to talk about the post-marathon blues, which are a very real thing, and the mental recovery that happens after a race, how you should recover, so some tips around that, and balancing between the rest and the temptation to jump straight back into training. So firstly, why does recovery matter? So running that marathon and 42 Ks, and we put it again, not just the marathon, but half marathon, but it's an incredible achievement to be able to do that. So it's usually an accumulation of months and sometimes years of training and planning and sacrifice that occur to get there. And whilst the finish line feels like it's the end of that process, there's an important process that needs to occur after that, and that's the recovery. And recovery is not just about giving your legs a break and putting your feet up and enjoying a beer and a burger. It's allowing your body and your mind to recover. So there's a number of changes that happen and damage that happens in our body when we do something extreme like a marathon or an ultra marathon. And so it's important that we respect that and do things that we can do to optimize that recovery. And so there's been a number of studies that have looked at the recovery and tissue recovery and system and organ recovery after a marathon. And this is a blog that I wrote actually after Sydney, because it was something I was interested in after Sydney, and obviously anecdotally myself and seeing what my runners had been through. But I wanted to have a look and see what the literature's actually said. So we'll put a link to that blog that I'd written, and also again, like we usually do, in references into the show notes as well too. So we know that these changes, some changes after a marathon can be days, and others can take weeks. So what are some of the physiological tolls that happen after running 42.2 days? Well, firstly, in terms of our musculoskeletal system, so muscles and tendons. Now we all know first up the good old DOMS, or what's called delayed onset muscle soreness. Now this is the classic, and this is why I love going to, traveling somewhere to a marathon and seeing people the next day that aren't quite walking properly. And this is a pretty common thing to see after a marathon. Usually peaks in that 48 hours. So usually 2 days is the worst for that. I remember my first marathon. My calves were absolutely cooked that I struggled going downstairs. Upstairs wasn't too bad. Downstairs was no good. And what I've found since that time, and I think potentially super shoes playing a role in that, my calves, I don't feel that so much anymore. It's more my quads that I really get sore in. So after Sydney a few months ago, and with the downhills of Sydney, my quads were absolutely torched, and I had to at work had to go down the stairs holding the banister, because I just did not have the strength in those muscles there. So we know then, and if I'd taken a blood test, then we would have seen that my CK, or also known as creatine kinase, and lactate dehydrogenase, so they would be elevated quite high, and they're basically a sign of muscle damage. And it's most greatly seen in the when we see that muscle damage, it's most greatly seen in the quads and the calves, which is where most people will be feeling their aches and pains. Tendons also undergo quite a bit of stress there, and much like when there is a tendon injury, tendons are slower to recover, and so some people can get mistaken in thinking that, oh, yep, my muscle ache is gone, therefore my musculoskeletal system has recovered. But no, tendons do take longer, and there actually hasn't been a lot of research that's looked at the full recovery of a tendon. There's been studies that have looked at immediate changes after a run, and seeing a decrease in volume of the tendon, and obviously as things get wrung out. But this is again where we've got to be careful in not jumping into things too soon, and we'll talk about that later on. There's also effects and impacts that have on our an immune function as well too, and also effects of just body-wide inflammation. So C-reactive protein, which is a marker of systematic inflammation, or systemic inflammation, as to say, that can spike more than 100 times after a marathon. So just to give you an idea of how stressful that is on the body. And we also know that the immune system becomes temporarily suppressed, and this is where there is that a window where we are prone to infection after a marathon, and perhaps after when it's being released, some of you that have just done the marathon may have succumbed to that and fallen ill. I know I've certainly had runners that have done that, and myself having that happen. I reckon out of my 11 marathons, it's probably happened to me twice, I think, where I've got unwell immediately after a marathon there, because of that open window of vulnerability of my immune system. So things to be careful of around through there is obviously just being mindful of hygiene, so staying away from people that are sick, but just washing your hands, and obviously some of the recovery techniques that we're going to be talking about as well too. What about the heart? Well, certainly running a marathon is pretty taxing on the heart and the kidneys, and there's certainly changes after a marathon and what's called cardiac fatigue, and these usually do normalise though within 3 to 4 days, so they're pretty quick to recover, thankfully, with the heart. So there's no sort of long-term damage to the heart there. The kidneys also take a bit of a hit, so that's up to 80% of marathoners have shown some degree of acute kidney stress afterwards. But again, thankfully, this is quite quick to respond, and often is back to normal within 48 hours. Energy systems, well, we know certainly for running that far and long, that your glycogen stores, your energy system is going to be taking a whack, and your muscles, that muscle's primary fuel, that's going to be heavily depleted, and hopefully you've done a good job with fueling during your race, but this is where afterwards becomes really important to replenish those stores, and it can often take about 48 hours to get those stores back to normal. So as we can see from these body system wise, there's wide ranging effects that running a marathon can have. So how long does it take to bounce back? So usually in terms of we talk about the musculoskeletal system, we usually say that soreness, peaks at that 48 hours, and that can sometimes take a good 5 days to settle down. But we often find that neuromuscular control, so that's, and even things like looking at hopping ability and plyometric ability, that can actually take quite a while longer to restore. I know certainly me anecdotally, I find that I don't get the sort of the spring in my legs usually until about 4 weeks after a marathon, and sometimes 6 weeks. And where that ranges is that if I've had a marathon that's gone quite well, so I've paced it well and been able to run really strong and finish strong, I find I do recover a lot better than a marathon that has not gone so well and I'm really pushing myself quite hard. That usually does extend the recovery. And anecdotally, I've also seen that a lot of my runners as well too, where they haven't perhaps paced so well or they just didn't have a good day, and that does add some time onto the recovery. We mentioned before as well too with the tendons and needing a little bit longer as well too. So just because the pain is gone doesn't mean that their function has fully regained. I often find also that my paces. So when I resume running, we'll talk a little bit about that soon. But when I resume running, my paces are actually usually a little bit slower than what they have been in the lead up to the marathon. So my easy runs leading into the marathon might be 4:45 for 5 minute kilometers. And then after a marathon, when I'm starting my easy running, sometimes that's as 5 minutes or even 5:10, 5:15. So I find it really does take a hit, and I don't force that. Again, that's a reflection that my body is still recovering. The immune system, as we mentioned, that usually does normalize within a few days, but it can depend on how disrupted your sleep and how disrupted your recovery is after the race. Glycogen stores, as we mentioned, the energy stores usually get back within 48 hours if you've done a good job with fueling, and heart and the kidneys usually take within 3 to 4 days to get that back to normal. So it's important to know that that these systems do take some time to recover at different rates. I think that thankfully some of the serious stuff like the heart and kidneys can restore quite quickly, but the musculoskeletal issues can take a little bit longer to restore. We also want to talk about as well, I mean, that's sort of covering the physiological side of things, but we also want to talk about the psychological recovery that happens after a marathon. And it's important to recognize that that a marathon is not just a test of physical ability, but also psychological as well. And so it's not unusual after a big race, and this might be your half marathon, it might be your marathon, it could be your 10K, something that you've really worked towards over a period of time. It's not unusual to feel a bit emotionally flat and sometimes even a little bit lost. And this is a phenomenon that we call the post-marathon blues. And after months of having structure and purpose and you suddenly wake up after this race and, you don't have a plan. There's no sort of countdown to an important event. And there's also, you lose that sense of daily working towards things and that sense of progress. So that's actually quite normal. And I've certainly experienced that too a number of times. And this is often where you see, and, I often see memes and images being made of this where runners will sign up for another race. They're like, I'm down, 24 hours, 48 hours later, they're signing up for another race. And it's funny actually, after my first half marathon, which I didn't really train properly for. This is a long time ago now. I said I'd never do one of those again. And then after my first marathon, which I did train properly for, and it was really hard. I found it really hard. I'd said to my wife at the finish line, I'd never do one of those again. And then I did my first Ironman triathlon. And after that, I said I'd never do one of those again. And obviously, I've since done many half marathons and many marathons, and actually went on to do two Ironman triathlons. So my wife jokes and says that she never trusts anything I say on the after the finish line of a race, but that's after that sort of that those feelings are settled, then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's feeling a little bit down now. I'm going to get into the next challenge, and that's where you sort of you do forget how bad things were during a race, that's why you sort of people sign up for the next one. So we often find that the physical exhaustion that occurs, the disruption of sleep that often, getting up early on race morning, or, some anxiety in the lead up to the race there. And then, if you've been involved in a running group and working towards this big event, it's no wonder why that, a lot of runners do feel quite down after the race. Research has shown actually that there are some neurochemical changes in the brain there as well. So, doing heavy training and racing, so we find that there is a release of dopamine and endorphins and adrenaline, especially on race day. And so, on the race day, those rise quite sharply, and then there's a big crash that happens afterwards. So, from a neurochemical point of view, there are changes that happen, and that can lead then to these post-marathon blues. So, what can we do about these? Well, firstly, normalize it. Recognize that it's normal to have these post-marathon blues, and that this emotional fatigue is actually part of recovery. It's a good time. I often say it's a good time after a race to really reflect and not to rush the process of this recovery, this mental recovery. It can be useful to make notes of, journal of how the whole preparation went, how the race went. I'm often saying, to my runners, what went well, what didn't go so well, and writing that down at the time, because sometimes, months down the track, and a year later, if you're preparing for your next one, you sometimes forget what happened and what went well, and so obviously trying to recapture those things that went well and rectify those things that didn't go so well. Resetting goals. So again, don't jump straight into another prep. It's important to take that time to reflect and recover, but having a think about some potential races to do, and that doesn't have to be jumping into something next week. It could be working towards something 6 months or even a year later. So and perhaps often after a big race like a marathon or a half marathon, I often encourage my runners to focus on something a little bit shorter, which doesn't involve as much training to work towards, and sort of can keep motivation going, and is not so taxing on personal, family, and work life that marathon racing can, and training for a marathon that really can be. And then also reconnect with people as well too afterwards. I mean, I sometimes find and when I'm training for a marathon, obviously got a list of priorities in my life, and I know when I'm training for a marathon, that starts to come up in terms of priority. I've got to fit this training in, therefore I'm not doing this. And so after that marathon block and that marathon period, then it's a time to sort of reprioritize. So if it has been, well, look, I haven't been able to have a kick at the soccer as much as my son, with my son as much as I normally would. I haven't been able to get out for a bike ride with my daughter, or these sort of things, or reconnect with your partner and your spouse if you haven't seen your wife or husband for 12 weeks. So that's always a good time to just to reshuffle those priorities and get some normality back in your life. It's always like the work life balance, which is a bit of a myth. It's always a fluxing ups and downs. So it's a time to sort of work out what you've missed out on and concentrate on those areas there. So it's really important to know that physiological and psychological recovery go hand in hand, and it's not unusual if your mood is low and your motivation's dropping, that this can affect your sleep, and also your willingness, I suppose, to get back into things. And it's certainly important that for health professionals that treat runners, that they recognise that the importance that this this mindset has on the recovery, and whether the runner needs some encouragement to help get them out there, or get some focus, and coaches obviously are quite good at taking that on. So what about some things that you can do to some evidence-based recovery strategies after a race? So for some of you, this might be too late. You might have on the Sunday night gone out on the beers and eating all the foods that you shouldn't. And not to say that you shouldn't do that. Obviously, everything in moderation. But just know that having a night out on the beers after a race does impair your performance or your recovery. I don't think anyone would be surprised with that. I'll put my hand up and say I've done it myself, and I do that with the acknowledgement that this is I'm going to socialize socialize and I'm going to enjoy myself and obviously not write myself off. But I realize and recognize that this will delay my recovery. So immediately after a race, in terms of our nutrition and hydration, we want to be making sure that we get our fueling into us. So we want to get some carbohydrate and protein. We've just depleted those or near depletion of those body glycogen stores. So we want to get ideally 1.2 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight in there, and 20-30 grams of protein as well. So that might be some chicken and some rice, or just getting something healthy into you straight away to top those stores up. Hydration is really important, especially on really hot days where you may not have drunk as much as you can. Kudos to anyone that can drink a full cup of water without spilling it halfway over their face. So hydration is really important after a race. And yes, I know that beer is 99% water, but that does not count. And also eating good healthy foods, like there's polyphenol rich foods have been shown to help with recovery. So they're things like tart cherry juice and berries and leafy greens, and they've been shown to help with reduce muscle soreness as well too. So active recovery after a race. So we know that you often find that when you've been still for a period of time and then you go and start to move again, things are pretty stiff and sore. So some gentle movement, just walking, cycling, but just very, very easy. Swimming, getting in the pool if you want to do that, can aid with circulation and help reduce that stiffness. I sort of say just trying to break up the sitting time so that you're just getting out for little walks there. Some mobility drills and stretching can also be good. Getting the foam roller out or the massage gun to work on some of those sore areas. Just avoid. We don't want to be doing anything aggressive in the first few days. So don't hammer yourself when your body's been punished enough going through the 42 Ks. So don't be kind. In other words, some runners also swear by using things like contrast baths. So whether that's getting in an ice bath, whether that's getting an infrared sauna, that's one that I like to use as well. The use of compression garments can sometimes help that there as well. The evidence is a bit mixed with that, and to my knowledge, there's not a lot around actually that's looking at accelerating recovery after a marathon. They're often done in a lab looking at sort of exercise bouts, but nothing that's been done on a marathon to my knowledge. If anyone's known anything, and please let me know. Sleep is probably one of the most powerful things, and we'll certainly mention this a lot. I'm a big fan of sleep as a recovery tool. The great thing about it is that it's free. So really we should be aiming for at least 8 to 9 hours of sleep in the days after a marathon. So really focus on getting that sleep. And there's also things that can help us get to sleep, things like mindfulness and breathing exercises, and just having downtime with family and friends as well too can help to reduce those stress hormones and help us get that dopamine and that serotonin back in there, and help to improve those post marathon blues. So we certainly in terms of then one of the things that we spoke about was, when can I run again? So that's really a big question that I get runners asking me is, so I've done my race, when can I run again? Well, what we want to do is that we want to acknowledge that obviously the recovery time that we've just spoken about through there, and we want to avoid the temptation on jumping back in too soon. And I like to, with my runners, I usually say, okay, the week after a marathon, we're going to have that completely off. So there's no structure. We're just going to have it completely off. If you want to go for a bike ride or you want to do a swim, do that. But it's more just about recovery. Okay, it's about eating good foods, about getting a bit more, getting some good sleep, some rest, walking around, but really no structured training. And then we start some easy runs. So usually from week 2, I'll often even have that as an unstructured week. With my runners, I'll say, look, go and do what you want, but maximum of 60 minutes, and they have to be easy pace, so nothing quick there. And that then also gives the runner a bit of flexibility, that if they're like, well, you know what, I'm feeling a bit tired, or I don't want to run, I'm feeling a bit sore, then they don't need to do anything. It also gives them a bit of a mental reprieve as well. So some people find that having structure week in, week out, it's nice to have a bit of a break from that again. Some people like that. Some people say, no, I want to get in straight away. I want to be, get back into the routine. And so obviously that's different from person to person. Like I mentioned early on, I do often find that it takes me, a good 4 weeks to feel like I'm getting that spring back in my legs. I often find, looking at my paces that they are a lot slower in those first few weeks of getting back into running. And as I mentioned before, also that the better my race has gone, the better and quicker my recovery goes. So, just keep an eye on your paces. Ensure and be honest with yourself that those paces are easy. Don't push those. And speaking of pace, then, so what about speed work and resuming running sessions? Well, there's a recommendation that you take 1 day for every mile run. So for a marathon, that's 26.2 miles. So that's 26 days. So that's getting close to 4 weeks without speed work. And obviously a half marathon is less than that. The marathon, that's probably I do usually, and for my runners, it is often a few weeks before we're starting into sessions, and we might do so. If we're taking 1 week completely off, week 2 is easy running. Week 3 we'll sort of resume some more easy running and maybe getting a long run back up again if they want to do that. And then around that week 4 we might start with just putting some strides and surges back in there, and then then the following week we can start in structured speed work. So really don't jump into this too quickly. I think some of the common errors that I see with runners is that they do jump back into training too quickly after a marathon. And this can have a detrimental effect in a number of different ways. Number one, they're still recovering, and so jumping into hard sessions and really trying to push that can lead to breakdown. And the other thing that I tend an injury, and the other thing I tend to find as well too is that in terms of sort of strength, and I do a number of strength tests in my practice, and looking at serially testing runners and see how that changes. But often what changes throughout a marathon prep is, and from a strength training point of view, it's very hard to build strength in the latter phases of a marathon. And usually, the off season and your base training is really where we want to get the strength levels up quite high. And then once you start marathon training, whether that's a 12, 8 or 16-week block, it's actually very hard to try and further improve that strength because the running is so much that it just fatigues your legs. And so what we often find is that over the period of a marathon prep, your strength levels will progressively decrease, and then you're basically finishing the marathon and your strength levels are the lowest that they've been in a while. And so the danger of going straight into another marathon prep is that just further declines. And I've certainly seen that and saw that recently with some runners that jumped into, had a couple that went from Gold Coast, which was in July, and then launching straight into Melbourne, which was just on the weekend. Without having that sort of preparatory phase, and then sort of thankfully, these two in particular got to Melbourne and did well, but then they sort of pulled up quite badly after Melbourne. There was also another one that did Sydney, that went into Sydney as well, which was even tighter turnaround, and they started to have some issues during the Sydney prep. So really investing that time and not shortcutting that. So I think I'm a fan of sort of going back to the start, sort of really building your base, and really focusing on building that strength back up. Put some time into your strength routine, which is something that you're not able to do when you're training heavily. And that's something that I'm doing at the moment, is really working on, now that I've done my marathon back in Sydney, which is 6 weeks ago. This for me is a time to work on my strength, and I haven't minded that I've been pulling up a bit tired or a fraction sore after doing my strength sessions for my runs, because I'm not really training for anything in the particular. This phase for me, my next race goal is going to be probably Ballarat next year, and which is in April. So this is a good time for me just to again get my body strong, replenish my body, and gradually build up that base so I don't run into injuries. So yes, it's really important you don't jump in too quickly into another race, and so it's as health professionals that are managing runners, really encourage them as well too. If they've just come off a race, really encourage them to put the time into building their body back up, rather than going jumping into a training block straight away. Looking at things, assessing their function, assessing their strength, and giving them numbers and say, look, yeah, you were at here, now you're down here after the marathon, so this is why we need to put the time into building you back up. So if we go through and sort of summarize and some of the practical advice for runners, and then for health professionals. So for runners, you can expect soreness for 2 to 3 days. So at the time of publishing this, I think you hopefully will all be through that. So expect that soreness for 2 to 3 days. Anything lasting longer than that, can suggest that there is an injury at play, and this is where getting an assessment with a good health professional can ensure that there's nothing there that needs further attention. I should also mention as well too, this post marathon time is also a good opportunity to address those niggles or things that were really getting in your way during the marathon, and really get on top of those, because again, sometimes when we're training so much, we for some injuries, we're just holding them at bay, we're just keeping them there, and after the race is then a time to say, all right, let's get on top of these, let's dial the running back a bit, and let's put some more time into strengthening up these areas to get that going. So that's sort of musculoskeletal wise. Really, prioritizing your nutrition post the race, get your hydration right, and get some good sleep in that first few weeks, in that first week in particular, to also help your immune system and help that physiological recovery. Plan at least 1 week of no running after a race. I'm not a fan of jumping in too soon after that. Some light exercise in that first week, walking, light cycling, or some swimming there as well. Week 2, you can start to get back into those runs, but keep them short, keep them easy. Use the recovery time as an opportunity to reflect and set new goals. What went well, what didn't go well, and give your body the space it needs to adapt, and also reshuffle those priorities to spend that time with your family, or spend that time with your friends and your spouse. It's important to know that also, recovery is where all those fitness gains are consolidated. So pushing the training too soon can result in injury, and then missed time and lost fitness. So really, you want to get on top of that early to try and avoid that as much as possible. And so for some insights for health professionals. So for health professionals, but just be aware of these physiological changes that happen after a marathon. A lot of these things internally, thankfully, go restore pretty quickly, but some of the musculoskeletal issues can hang around for a while. Things like tendons and getting that neuromuscular control can take a little bit longer there. Educating our runners on how long that recovery can take, and ensuring that they're not too quick to jump back in and overtrain. You remember that that the connective tissue recovery can lag behind the symptom resolution, so they might be out of pain by 3 or 4 days after the marathon, but just educating them again that there is further time that's needed for that, and for those tissues to fully repair. Even if the runner says, I feel fine, just telling them again just to keep the pull back the reins and avoid them jumping in too soon. And certainly assessing their function after. It's a good opportunity to really get a good look at them after a marathon block, and ensure that they haven't lost too much of that strength, and identifying some areas that they could work on to help get them back up and get them ready for their next race goal, whenever that may be. So to wrap things up, finishing a marathon is certainly an incredible feat, and of physical and psychological prowess. But the real magic happens in those days and weeks afterwards, and it's really important. A lot of people do underestimate this recovery, and mistakes are made there, which can then set up for failure later on, and in terms of when it comes to injury. So recovery is not just a passive process. So it's an active, strategic phase of your training. So we've got this, we do go through all this beautiful work of training up for this marathon, and just consider this recovery process as just an extension of that training process there. So respect the timelines, you prioritize your nutrition, sleep, and that active recovery. Don't forget about the mental side. That post-marathon blues is certainly legit. If you feel flat after your big race, you're certainly not alone. I've experienced that myself as well. Use that time to reset, reconnect, and set new goals as well. Thanks for tuning in again to episode 2. We've got I've got a couple of guests lined up, which I'm pretty excited about, actually. So we as I mentioned in episode 1, we're going to be mixing up between solo episodes with these, and we'll probably keep these around that 30-minute mark, and then we'll do some interview style podcast episodes as well too. So thanks for tuning in to the Rehab Runway. If you found this episode helpful, then please share it with your running friends, your patients, or anyone preparing for the next marathon. Until next time, I'm Luke Nelson, helping you move smarter, recover stronger, and run better.